God's unseen hand. Maybe we could say it this way. Looking at this book, we're going to learn, I hope, how to develop a God-centered worldview in the midst of a world that has a very self-centered worldview. There's going to be a contrast in this book for a self-centered lifestyle and self-centered thinking with a God-centered one. Now, you ever start reading a book and you just couldn't wait till the end? I remember this, when the trilogy came out of The Lord of the Rings. This is years and years and years ago. I remember starting that. I probably read The Hobbit a dozen times before I was a teenager. And I was so captivated by this story when the trilogy came out and I began reading J.R.R. Tolkien's work. At some point in the series, I remember thinking, I just can't wait. I can't wait. And I go to the end of this book and read the finish. It didn't spoil the rest of it for me. I just wanted to read the finish. Well, in case I don't return, I want to give you something that's the end of the story, the very best part of the story, and it's in chapter 12. And in this chapter, verse 13 tells us the entire story, the entire matter. You won't remember my poems and my clever points and my anecdotal genius here in this book as we walk through it. But I hope you don't forget verse 13. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. So that's what we're going to be looking at here in the next few weeks, Lord willing. Let's dive right into verse 1. We began in verse 1 with a simple title. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Let's talk about this author for a few minutes. He's called the preacher. Koheleth is the word. It means a lecturer, a teacher. We don't know for sure. I think I know for sure. Many people do not know for sure that Solomon was the one that wrote this, because it doesn't say anywhere in Scripture, I, Solomon, have written these words. But when you compile all the evidence, you really have to think really hard not to come up with a conclusion that it is indeed Solomon. He's called the son of David in this passage. And then following the phrase son of David is king in Jerusalem, which could refer to David. That's the nearest antecedent here. But yet we learn again in a later verse, in verse 12, I think it is, where Solomon is called king in Jerusalem, which he was after his father. He's called a son of David. That doesn't necessarily prove it's Solomon, because many Jewish people are called son of David. But in verse 12, he's called the king in Jerusalem. Now that sort of links this preacher to David, the son of David, also to being a king in Jerusalem, which he was. In verse 9 of chapter 12, he's called a very wise man. And in verse 9 also, he's called a collector of proverbs. Now, I know I'm not trying to convince you that Solomon is the author, but he indeed is. He is. Now, why Solomon? Why did he write this? I want you to go back with me here to 1 Kings chapter 3. And I want you, if you haven't heard this story, I think you'll be interested to know this. And if you have heard it, just as I'm reading these verses, just ask God to show you something else. But in chapter 3 and verse 5, and Gideon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, ask what you wish me to give you. And Solomon said, you have shown great loving kindness to your servant David, my father, according as he walked before you in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart toward you, and you have reserved for him this great loving kindness, that you've given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, yet I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. Your servant is in the midst of your people, which you have chosen, a great people who are too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? If you were given that wish, anything would you like, what would it be? I heard a story about a man and his wife. They were celebrating their 40th anniversary, I believe, 40th or 50th anniversary. And so, maybe their 40th. And so they were away on an island somewhere on the beach walking, and the woman sort of stumps her toe on something in the sand, and she reaches down and she picks it up, and it's a brass lantern, old style lantern, an oil lantern. So she does gets the sand off of it, and all of a sudden a genie poofs out. And he says, you have one wish. What shall it be? Each of you, one wish. And she said to the genie, I'm enjoying my time so much on this getaway, this anniversary. I would love to travel all over the world for the rest of my life. He said, it is done. He looks to the husband and said, what's your wish? And the husband hesitated for a minute, and he said, oh, well, I might as well ask. I would like to have a wife 30 years younger than me. And so instantly, poof, he became 90 years old. Well, you got to be careful if you're given this kind of a wish. And this is not coming from a genie. This is coming from God. This man Solomon, who starts out here very humble, he says, I need your help, God, to judge this great kingdom you've given me. And the Bible says in verse 10, it was pleasing in the sight of the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked for yourself long life, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have you asked for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself discernment to understand justice, behold, I have done according to your words. Behold, I've given you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has been no one like you before you, nor one like you shall rise after you. I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there will not be any among the kings like you all of your days. If you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and commandments, as your father David walked, then I will prolong your days. Then Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered burnt offerings, and made peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. Here God has granted this man an incredibly wise heart, and it's put to the test right out of the gate. Then two women who were harlots came to this king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house. I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Happened on the third day after I gave birth that this woman gave birth to a child, and we were together. There was no stranger with us in the house, only the two of us in the house. This woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night, took my son from beside me, and while your maidservant slept, she laid him in her bosom and laid her dead son in my bosom. When I arose in the morning to nurse my son, behold, he was dead. And when I looked at him carefully, this was not my son, not the one I had born. Then the other woman said, No, for the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son. But the first woman said, No, for the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. Then they spoke before the king. And you know what the king did with his incredible wisdom, which, by the way, spread far and wide? The Queen of Sheba came to see this man whose story she had heard. Solomon simply said, Well, this won't do, having one child for two mothers. Bring me a sword, and we're going to cut this child in half and give each mother half. That's fair. And of course, the real mother said, No, let her have the child. And Solomon, in his judgment, then knew who the real mother was. So, as we look at the title of the author of this book, I feel very safely to lead you in the thing that this is indeed Solomon, the man given so much wisdom. Let's look. I want to make several observations about this. There are several themes in this book, but we're going to see several things in this chapter 1. The first thing that I want you to see is, the first theme, is this writer talks about the brevity of life. Life is short. The Bible gives us all kinds of metaphors describing our life in these terms. Job chapter 7 and verse 6, Job said, My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and comes to an end without hope. Remember, he says, life is but a breath. A weaver's shuttle. It moves back and forth and back and forth, weaving what is being woven in this thing. And inside of this shuttle is different colored thread. And it moves back and forth and back and forth until it has no more thread. You may be thinking in terms of a shuttle that spins with thread on it as well. So, life is like a weaver's shuttle. 2 Samuel 14:14, life is like water spilt on the ground. It's there for a moment and then it's gone. All of the poets talk about a ship on the horizon. Your life is like a ship on the horizon. For some of you that have done cruises and things, maybe you've been docked in a harbor somewhere and you're out on the boat enjoying the sunset, and another ship is out in the distance, and you watch that ship and you see that ship literally disappear. That's the metaphor for our life. It's here for a moment and then it's gone. James talks about our life being like a vapor, a puff, a mist. And other Psalms we're going to talk about in a minute describe our lives like grass or flowers. They're pretty today, but they're gone tomorrow. So we're going to see this, the brevity of life, that life is short. And this is what he says in verse 2. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. All is like a puff. Look at Psalms 39. Got a couple of Psalms that I want to show you. Psalm 39 and Psalm 144. But listen to the psalmist as he gives us, verse 5 and 6. Behold, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my lifetime as nothing in your sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath. Selah. And then he goes, I think it's verse 11. No, it's not. But anyway, there's more. Go Psalm 144 and verse 3. And once again, the psalmist carries this theme all throughout the Psalms. But verse 3 and 4, man is like a mere breath. And that is our word Hebel. Hebel. It's the word that's used in Ecclesiastes for vanity. The same idea. Man is like a mere breath, a puff. His days are like a passing shadow. So the idea here of our life is all of these things. Now, let me ask you, And I know it has become cliche, but does it seem to you that time flies the older you get? Fellas, I just can't believe how much time has passed in my life as I'm looking at it. It's moving quickly. Proverbs 27:1 says, "Boast not of thyself for tomorrow, for you know not what a day may bring forth." So, life is short. Life is brief. The second observation that we're going to see here in this chapter, life is elusive. And he describes that throughout this chapter 1. And he uses illustrations here of the sun chasing its tail, of the wind chasing itself from south to north, and vice versa. And when I think of this sense of life being elusive, I think of all of the businesses that have been lost to this pandemic. I think of one little restaurant in New York City that is the restaurant where I met Bart Fisher. And I've talked to you about that before. A lot of you know who Bart Fisher is, our good friends who are now in Florida. This little restaurant in the Murray Hill district was vibrant. Been in business for maybe 40 years. I've been there the last 30. I know these people really well. And I talked to the owner last week, and because of New York's rules and laws, they can only have a 25% their space in their restaurant. And this is a tiny little place, tiny little Croatian, Italian restaurant. And she said, "We can't make it. We just can't make it." They've had the same kitchen staff for 35 years. The same cook, the same waiters, the same owners. Yes, they join a host of others that are not going to make it. Life is elusive. You just somehow can't put your hands around it, because just as sure as you do, something's going to happen and it will be gone. Look at Psalm 103 and verse 15. The psalmist tells us here, "As for man, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourishes. When the wind has passed over it, it is no more, and its place acknowledges it no longer." This is the idea here that Solomon is wanting us to see in this whole book. And he asks a question in verse 3 that pretty well frames the rest of the book. And the answers come out of the rest of the book in what verse 3 says. Here's his question. "What advantage does a man have in all of his work which he does under the sun?" What advantage does he have? And this is answered from verses 4 to 11. The quick answer is nothing. Nothing, no advantage. At the end of life, what will your surplus be? And I will suggest to you that it will be nothing. You will leave everything behind. You say, "Well, wait a minute, Pastor. Surely what I have taught my children I won't leave behind. It will still remain with them, and teaching them about God and giving them a God consciousness, surely that will remain. And yes, it will, until their generation passes. And then it's gone. Unless they teach it to their children, and they teach it to their children." But what the book of Ecclesiastes is brutally wanting us to see is that just being in the circle of life is not what we're about if we're true believers. Life is short. Life is elusive. What you have right now, you may not have next week, including your health. Life is also a series of repetitions. Now, look at verse 4. And as we walk our way through this, listen to all of these repetitive things, cyclical things. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. In other words, the only thing you're going to leave behind is the earth that you're living on right now, and we don't know how long that's going to remain. Also, the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. Once again, life is a series of repetitions. The wind, blowing toward the south, then turning toward the north. The wind continues, swirling along, and on its circular courses, the wind returns. A circle, a circle. All the rivers, and this is sad, all the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Ever felt that way? That in spite of all of the things that your life, you have, your blessings, your work, there's still that bit of emptiness maybe that you feel. The sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, they will flow again. And he looks at all this repetition of life and he says, all things are wearisome. This wears me out. Have you ever been at that point in your life where you're just worn out with the bad news? I haven't listened to very much news, which is really, really odd, because that's just about most all that I watch. But I almost can't stand to watch it. You feel the same way? It's wearing me out. The wickedness, the evil, the looting, the robbing, the fires, the protests, the political this, the political that. It's wearisome. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear is filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be. That which has been done is that which will be done. For there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which anyone might say, see this? This is new? I think about all of these things. The life living in the ebb and flow. Now, let me speak to your heart, Christian. If you're in this cycle and you're only making a cyclical progress in your life, and you're not making a lateral move, a move out of that circle, which means when a Christian comes to the reality of a God-centered worldview, he realizes that this circle is not what makes me happy. It doesn't fulfill me. It doesn't make me yearn for more of the circle. I have in my heart a yearning for God. And that's where I think from this book of Ecclesiastes, I hope that many of us will really see ourselves and really pull out of that cyclical, earthbound, world-centered view of life. We read this verse a lot here, 1 John 2:15. It could be translated this way: stop loving the world. That's the circle. Stop loving the world, nor the things that are in the world. The circle. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. If the love of God is in my heart, I am longing for heavenly things. And if I am not longing for heavenly things, if I'm only longing for all of those things that come in this life, I wonder if I really am a Christian, or at least a disciple of Christ. Instead of the verse in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life, with Jesus is telling us about himself, we've replaced him with our own lives. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. I'm the one that is satisfying myself by living in this repetition, this circle of the world. So we've seen life is short, life is elusive. According to this chapter 1, life is a series of repetitions. And it can get worse. Because the next observation in verse 13 to 15, life is a series of frustrations. Are you frustrated? Have you had a terrible week where your job just, everything is changing? Some of you still have jobs and you're working under different circumstances. Can you imagine being a policeman right now? Can you imagine the frustration of trying to live your dream? A young man that always wanted, he had that growing up from boyhood, such a respect and honor for the policeman, and because of a very, very bad policeman are thrown into all kinds of uncertainties. Life is filled with a series of frustrations. And in verse 13, he mentions 3 of them. He says, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under the heavens. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. It's hard. Life is hard. Being a Christian is hard. David Gibson once again writes, and I love this. I love these words. Let's pretend that if we get the promotion, or see our church grow, or bring up good children, we'll feel significant and leave a lasting legacy behind us. Wow. What would that be, church? For us to be like some churches where they're having to have 3 and 4 services to get the people in? Let's pretend that if we change jobs or immigrate to the sun, we won't experience the humdrum tedium and ordinariliness of life. Let's pretend that if we move to a new house, we will be happier. We'll never want to move again. Let's pretend that if we end one relationship and start a new one, we won't ever feel trapped. Let's pretend that if we were married or weren't married, we would be content. Let's pretend that if we had more money, we would be satisfied. Let's pretend that if we get through this week's pile of washing and dirty diapers and shopping lists and school runs and busy evenings, next week will be quieter. Let's pretend that time is always on our side to do the things we want to do and become the people we want to be. Let's pretend we can break the cycle of repetition and finally arrive in a world free from weariness. We long for change in a world of permanent repetition, and we dream of how to interrupt it. We long for lives of permanence in a world of constant change, and we strive to achieve it. We spend our lives aligning our better selves with a different future that we envision as more rewarding. And in it all, we are simply trying to make permanent. Now listen, we are trying to make permanent by what is never meant to be permanent. And by constant change, we are trying to control what is not meant to be controlled, which is the world. The seasons and natural cycles of the world are content to come and go, but we sweat and toil to make believe that it will not be so with us. Yes, life is filled with a series of frustrations. I love what C.S. Lewis writes here. The fact that our heart yearns for something earth can't supply is proof that heaven must be our home. And what the book of Ecclesiastes is going to challenge us in is, what are we living for? Are we in the cycle of repetition? Are we in this cycle and it's more of the same every day and every month and every year? And yeah, a few things change, but what about what Jesus said in Matthew 6:19? Is this not why he said, lay not up for yourselves treasures on this earth where moths can eat, where rust can corrupt, and thieves can break in and steal? Lay up for yourselves what? The word thesaurus. means a vertical stacking of coins. A thesaurus is a vertical stacking of words. Jesus said, don't stack up all the things that make you feel significant in your life and leave me out of it. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Now, let me ask you a question. Let's find out if you're stuck in this cycle or not. What have you done for somebody this last week? That, number one, you don't get anything out of it, that you do it with a pure motive, and that you do it because you feel the Lord has burdened you to do it, whether it's to help somebody, to do something for somebody, to whatever it may be, something that leaves this world in value. How many of us can name something we did last week that is God-honoring and God-glorifying and gets out of that cycle of serving myself? I hope there are many things that can be said. And that little jar back there is still waiting for other things for the 1+1 lifestyle, where we go the second mile for someone. We do something that's not selfish. So first of all, we see in this life as a series of frustrations, he said it's a very grievous task. And he goes on, and even in this expression, he says, I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, in verse 14, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. More frustration. In the end, our best made plans are just chasing the wind. You ever captured some air in here, put it in your pocket, and took it home and let it out in your house so that you could have some church air in your house? We're all here. I think the most of us probably are believers. And this makes this place sanctified, right? So just reach out and get you some. Put it in your pocket. Take it home. It won't cost you anything. And you can take as much as you want. You just keep heaping it in there until we finish here. That's the idea here of the frustration of it's all chasing after the wind. If you're in this cycle, it's frustrating. And here's something that is incredibly timely in verse 15, which is the third thing he mentions here. The third reason in answering the question of verse 3, he said, what is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. In other words, he's talking here about the situation we're in. We can't fix it. I read this on Facebook this week. The problem is sin, not skin. The answer is grace, not race. Our nation needs God. That's the idea here. The frustrating thing in our world of not being able to fix what's so wrong, and to be able to be respectful and to have the conversations and not to follow our presuppositional ideas that we've had maybe from childhood, but yet somehow to try and fix this problem. It's not new. This question is not new. The book of Habakkuk, you're on your own how to get there. I just got lucky. Habakkuk, chapter 1 and verse 1. Habakkuk the prophet looked at his day, just like we're looking at our day, the wickedness, the crookedness. And he has a question for God. Maybe you have a question for God. The oracle which Habakkuk the prophet saw. How long, O Lord, will I call for help, and you will not hear? I cry out to you, violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look on wickedness? Verse 12, another question. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? Verse 13, verse 13. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Habakkuk had a real problem with the fact that he couldn't fix the problem of his day. And the reason why he couldn't is that God was judging his people. Have you ever thought that this pandemic is God judging the world? Do we deserve it? Yes. The sin, the wickedness, the ungodliness, yes. If God is at work here, yes. But the answer that Habakkuk got when he is asking God these questions is in chapter 2, in verse 4. The little part of a verse that's sort of hidden in this verse, and it's a verse from which we will be familiar with. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right with him, but the righteous will live by his faith. That's found 3 other times in the Bible. Paul picks it up in Romans 1:17. He gives it to the Galatians in chapter 3 and verse 11. And Dr. Luke, if he's the author of Hebrews, gives it to us in chapter 10 and verse 38. I think it's pretty important that as we look at life, as we look at the frustrations, as we look at the brevity of life, as we look at the elusive nature of life, how that you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, that it should bring us as a people to faith. And that's exactly what this chapter 1 is leaving us with. Now, this morning we've seen a lot of things. We've seen that life is short. As a result, use your life to glorify God. Don't spend all your thinking and all your days trying to just get faster in that cycle. Oh, if I just work a little harder, and I'm of all people one not to talk about this, and probably the reason why I'm having issues now is because of that. Slow down. Hasn't it been a wonderful, would you admit, hasn't it been a wonderful thing to have more family time? To have a little more table time maybe? To have a little more time to reflect on life? Life is short. Let's use it. We've talked about life being elusive. Don't count on it. Don't count on that. Life is full of repetitions. Yes, it is. But don't fall in love with the cycle. Don't fall in love with the world system. Love God instead. Life, yes, is a series of frustration. But face it with faith. Look at it and say, oh God, teach me and show me your way. One man said these words, and I'll close. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. That's what I want to do in my life. I want to end my life fearing God and keeping His commandments. The rest doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I want us to bow our heads in the closing moments of this morning. And I pray that if God has revealed to you that you have had a mistress in your life, and that mistress has been work, that mistress has been a desire to have more, maybe that mistress has been just our fevered activity, too much, too much, too much. I pray that God will reveal to you how that you can get out of this vicious loving of the world and start spending more time loving God, which that describes the things you do, not the things you feel. Love is a volitional choice. When we say, I love God, it means, well, what are you doing in your life? How are you serving? How are you giving? How are you responding to His call? Whatever it is the Lord is speaking to you about, I pray that you'll honor Him. This morning, if you're not a Christian, you're listening to my voice online and you have not made Jesus Christ Savior of your life. You have sin that is separating you from God. It is a wide gulf that you will never be able to cross without Jesus Christ. Why not open your heart, surrender, confess your sins, place your faith in the finished work of Christ, and do it today. And then get out of that rat race cycle of falling in love with this world. Start loving on God. Thank you, Lord. Open our eyes. Let us see what you will have us see.